Hey there, Ryan Black, real estate investor here, and in today's quick investing tip, I want to talk to you about meth tests and the importance of why I always do meth tests on any property that I'm considering purchasing. So meth, also known as methamphetamine, is a type of drug, right? Highly addictive, very dangerous. Why do we want to do meth tests? Well, there's a lot of different types of drugs that people can do in their property, but most of those drugs, while harmful to the user of the drug, any residue or trace elements of that drug that remain in the property are not going to be harmful to the next owner. Meth is different. If someone is smoking meth or especially cooking meth, the different byproducts and agents, the chemicals that are used in the consumption and fabrication of that drug are highly, highly dangerous and can be a great cause for concern for anybody who is going to live in that property. So because of that, it's so important that I, as an investor, when I go into a property, that I perform that meth test as part of my due diligence. Now you might be saying, well, look, I know the people who I'm buying the house from. They're, really good people. They'd be the last people on earth to be smoking meth in their house. Granted, I could tell you stories of people that we have met, places that we've been to, where you would say, this is the last place on earth anybody would be smoking meth. But maybe they had somebody over to visit. They had their grandkids there, and their grandkids' friends had smoked prior. You don't have to necessarily smoke within the property for it to be contaminated. If somebody's out in their car and they're smoking meth and then they come in the house, they can actually contaminate the house, right? Just like if you get really dirty and dusty, you come in the house and then you get footprints all over the floor and you get dirt and dust everywhere. It's the same thing. Meth can then contaminate the house. Now, why do we care about meth contamination? Well, obviously the health hazards, but as an investor, I'm not going to live there, but I am either going to have a tenant, a short-term tenant or a long-term tenant living there, or I'm going to resell that property to somebody else. And that end buyer, for sure, if they're a traditional buyer, their agent's going to say, hey, you ought to do a meth test on this property to make sure that it's safe. And obviously, I want to have a clear conscience knowing that the property that I'm providing, either for a new sell or for a new purchaser or for a tenant, is safe. And so if you're thinking like, well, I don't care, I don't need to run the test, I'm just going to acquire the property, you better be prepared to know that when that buyer comes to purchase that property from you, they're going to run that meth test. And if it comes back positive, guess who gets to now undo everything that they've done? That's going to just destroy your numbers, and you are going to get burned because you're going to have to undo, go back, remediate the problem, and who knows what has to be redone, what damage, collateral damage is going to occur from that. So that's why me personally, as an investor, I always perform a meth test when in the due diligence process of acquiring a property, because it's a no-brainer. I know that I need to do it. Now, if a property is contaminated, that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't want the property. In most cases, I don't care, right? As long as I know it's there and I know to what level it's there. Was it somebody who just came in? And you can tell by the level, the concentration of the meth, whether, was it somebody maybe that just walked through the house that contaminated it? Was it somebody that was living there that was smoking, or were they cooking it? Now, at least in the state of Utah, there are different regulations that determine what type of remediation needs to be done depending on the level of contamination. So if you have a much higher level of contamination, you have to use a certified or a licensed cleaning company that's approved by the Department of Health, and then they have to give it an inspection and a clean bill of occupancy saying that the problem has been remediated. Because a property can get red tagged for certain types of health violations that make it unsafe for someone to be in the property. So if you have high levels, you got to do that. If it's a lower level where it's a simple clean, there are companies that can just come in and clean it and get taken care of for you. And it's also, of course, super important to do your post-cleaning tests and make sure that, that it comes back ND, non-detected, which means that if there is any, it's so low the machine can't even test it, so it doesn't present a health hazard. Now, when purchasing the property and we're in the due diligence and we run that meth test and we come back and see, okay, this is positive, how does that benefit us as the buyer? It gives us leverage in the negotiation. right? Because now, once again, I'm basing this off of Utah law, but now I can come back to the seller and say, hey, look, according to Utah law, this is something that now that we know, because they may not even have known that there was meth in their property. Now that we know, this is something that you need to divulge to any future buyer. If I go back and say, look, I'm going to need to drop my price by 15 grand, 20 grand, whatever it is, because now I need to remediate this meth that changes my numbers, and they say, no, I'm not going to do it. Okay, great, but you are now obligated to let any future buyers know, which if it's an end buyer, that stigma is huge and nobody's going to want to buy it. Only an investor, somebody who knows how to remediate the problem, is going to want to buy it. And if they say, oh, well, I'm not going to tell anyone, nobody's going to know. Okay, you can report that to the Department of Health, because you got to realize if you get another buyer who comes along who's maybe not quite as educated as you are, they move into that property and they've got little kids, or they've got, even not just adults, they're living there, and they get super sick because of the contamination, where you knew that it was contaminated and you could have done something about it and you didn't. How's that going to feel on your conscience? So one thing, usually the sellers are pretty good when they're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Okay, they're willing to work with you. But if for whatever reason they're not, realize that you've got that in your arsenal, and it's kind of I would say it's your responsibility to watch out for other future buyers who simply are maybe not as educated, a little more ignorant on those things. We wouldn't want to have that on our conscience, that somebody else got sick because of the dishonesty of that seller. So once again, meth tests, super important. I always do them, and they're not that expensive. It's like $45 to run the test on a property, and so totally worth it during the due diligence process, during the due diligence time, to figure out, is this a property I want? That just allows me as an investor to run my numbers more accurately and to be able to truly get a clear picture of where I'm going to be at, and knowing that I'm not going to have that surprise pop up at the very end when I'm trying to sell the property.